Join us.
Thank you, Kathleen. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and it's a particular pleasure to see a book published at AUR, so well done, Davor. It's one of those books that one wants to read, simply because it's not too long, it fits in a pocket, and it has, above all else, a really imaginative theme, the human work of art. I know Davor is a workaholic, someone who has brought a great deal of his energy to AUR in the last 18 months, so we're simply delighted to have this occasion to present your book, and we hope it sells well, and with it we will get more fame for all the courses that you teach here, Davor. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion tonight. Kathleen.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathleen Fitzsimmons. I'm the Program Director of the Business Studies Department program, and I have known Davor since he joined AUR in September of 2013. But I really got to know him last fall when we worked on a project together along with our colleagues Anna Petrolini and Bob Sonnabend to launch a program at the Museum of Trajan's Market that's given our students an opportunity to work as docents and as interns at the City of Augustus exhibit now showing at the museum. Davor was generous with his time and his expertise and helped us prepare the students, many of whom were not art history or archaeology students, but rather marketing and business and tourism students, to get ready for their role as visitor services assistants at the museum. So it is a great pleasure to be playing the role of MC for this event this evening. And here to help us understand the importance of Davor's achievement with this, his 7th tome, are two leading scholars and theologians. Father Marco Rupnik and Dr. Louis Ruprecht are with us, and they will be sharing their observations and speak to the unique contribution that Davor is making to his field. So I'll introduce them to you, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask them questions after their comments before we adjourn to the back to raise a glass to the man of the hour, to Davor. So first we have Father Marco Ivan Rupnik, and AUR is truly honored to have Father Rupnik with us tonight. He is the leading mosaic artist in the world and the most prominent Roman Catholic artist, as well as a noted theologian. He and his team at the Pontifical Oriental Institute, Centro Aletti, have created works that have been compared to the work of the divine Michelangelo, and that embellished churches around the world, including John Paul II's private chapel, in the Vatican, the Basilica of Fatima, the Basilica of San Giovanni Rotondo, and the facade of the Sanctuary of Fatima. Born in Slovenia, Father Marco Rupnik joined the Jesuits as a young man. He studied philosophy at the University of Ljubljana and then graduated from the Accademia di Belle Arti here in Rome, after which he earned a degree in theological studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University. He went on to do his doctorate at the Greg in missiology. Father Rupnik teaches at the Pontifical Oriental Institute, the Pontifical Gregorian Institute, Sant'Anselmo Pontifical Liturgical Institute, and is in high demand to teach seminars and lectures at academic institutions around the world, around Europe. He's been a consultant for the Pontifical Council for Culture, and since 2012 has been a consultant for the Pontifical Council for Promoting New Evangelization. It was Pope John Paul II who appointed him director of the Centro Aletti, whose mission is to explore on a theoretical and very practical level the relationship between art and place of worship. And we are very, very happy to welcome Father Rupnik.
Grazie signora. Si sente?
È acceso?
Non c'è nessuna lampada da nessuna parte. Si sente? Non si sente? Sì. No, I go there. There is no problem. Much easier. Much more simple. Allora, grazie signora per le parole, grazie per questo invito. E cosa dire di questo libro? Prima cosa, che si può leggerlo è leggibile. Questo è molto importante perché alcuni libri saranno pure importanti ma non si possono leggere, sono illeggibili. Questo è un libro leggibile. Questo fa grande onore all'autore. È leggibile. Seconda cosa, è scritto in modo tale che da pagina in pagina cresce l'interesse del lettore dove l'autore vuole portarci. È veramente anche un testo di una certa arte pedagogica. Espone le questioni intriganti e poi ci porta a sciogliere i nodi in modo molto bello. Ecco, questo proprio così come si legge questo libro. Ma adesso vorrei dire, però scusate che mi prendo l'orologio, perché senza questo si può parlare troppo, così mi controllo che non parlo troppo. Adesso vorrei dire alcune cose che leggendo il libro vorrei tirare fuori anche per incuriosire voi. Prima cosa, lui apre la questione di creatività. Come comprendere la creatività? Va bene, come prototipo della creatività è Dio creatore, ma questo ha qualche nesso con la creatività artistica? Un artista che crea ha qualche cosa in comune con Dio creatore? È una domanda interessante. Questa domanda è interessante per quale motivo soprattutto? Perché se noi guardiamo la Bibbia, sulla creazione sono 3 pagine, poi avviene il peccato, la creazione è ferita e allora tutta la Bibbia parla della redenzione, della salvezza dell'uomo per recuperare ciò che si è perduto con il peccato. E allora io penso che la prima cosa per me molto importante, che dimostra alto livello del pensatore che tratta l'argomento, che arriva a domandarsi se l'uomo può creare. Veramente quello che stiamo facendo è una creazione o non è una creazione? E vedete, la questione è molto seria, perché teologicamente la creazione significa far alzare il livello della vita, livello di esistenza, a un livello dove l'esistenza non è più corruttibile, ma rimane, è già salvata dalla morte, dalla corruzione. Questo è teologicamente la creatività. Allora la domanda sua è giusta, cioè l'uomo può creare o no? L'uomo può alzare le cose a un livello tale che sono fuori dalla corruzione, dalla morte. Allora, siccome per essere veramente creatori bisogna creare dal nulla come ha creato Dio, allora lui scrive tante pagine. Cosa è questo ex nihilo? Cosa è questo? Che significa creare dal nulla? Bene, questo primo livello capiscono anche i bambini, che vuol dire che Dio per creare non aveva bisogno di un'altra cosa, da lì prendeva e creava, ma lui giustamente fa vedere che ex nihilo significa una creazione libera, senza costrizioni, senza passioni, libera. Cioè ex nihilo praticamente, dogmaticamente significa dall'amore libero. L'uomo può fare questo? No. Bisogna che sia prima redento. Perciò io penso che lui non lo dice proprio così esplicitamente, ma io oserei dirlo, che ciò che noi pensiamo di Dio creatore, infatti noi non partecipiamo a Dio creatore, ma partecipiamo a Dio redentore, perché tutto ciò che noi vogliamo creare deve far vedere alzamento dalla morte fuori, dal ferito fuori, dal fragile fuori, e questo è la redenzione. Allora io penso che questa è la prima parte molto interessante intorno a lui. Lui si rifà agli autori a lui molto cari, ma anche da me molto cari, come Nikolai Berdyaev, un autore russo estremamente creativo. Io penso che Davor un po' assomiglia a Berdyaev. È un uomo libero, osa pensare, molto coraggioso. Questo libro infatti è molto coraggioso, perché Berdyaev è veramente un uomo coraggioso, perché vedi, Berdyaev era un comunista, partecipava alla rivoluzione, un genio intellettuale. Poi vede dove vanno le cose. Lui dice: come sono caduto in questa trappola? Come sono caduto? E quando capisce perché è caduto, esce fuori e comincia a far vedere la grandezza del cristianesimo, della fede cristiana, della libertà dell'uomo. E la sua grande opera è proprio questo: l'individuo e l'effetto del peccato, la persona e l'uomo redento, l'uomo libero, è all'immagine di Dio. Gisulas, l'altro autore a cui lui si rifà, Berdyaev è morto negli anni 40, Gisulas è vivo, è un vescovo greco ortodosso, un grande teologo, 80 anni adesso, forse, un po' di più, forse addirittura. E Gisulas è molto simile a questo pensiero, e lui descrive la salvezza dell'uomo come pellegrinaggio dall'individuo alla persona, dall'ipostasi biologica all'ipostasi ecclesiale, comunionale. Vedete, per noi oggi è molto difficile capire la differenza tra individuo e la persona, ma per il libro di Davor è fondamentale capire questo. Questo libro veramente non si capisce se non si capisce la differenza tra individuo e persona. E Davor arriva ad affermare le cose coraggiose che io firmo subito, che l'individuo non può creare niente, perché nell'individuo non c'è nulla che può presentare lo slancio creativo, perché l'individuo è un'espressione della natura, di una natura ferita, mortale, fragile. Cosa vuole fare? L'individuo non può creare. La creatività fa parte della persona. Per aiutarci un pochino, dico una cosa che lui non dice qua, ma lo dico adesso così per capirci tra di noi. Che cosa è l'individuo? L'individuo è l'espressione della natura. L'individuo, cioè ogni singolo tavolo, è l'espressione della natura del tavolo, ma l'uomo non è espressione della natura umana. Cristo non è espressione della natura umana, ma si è espresso nella natura umana. Questo è già un processo creativo. La persona riesce a trasfigurare la natura umana, l'individuo è schiavo della natura umana. Perciò l'individuo, come dice Gesù, è l'effetto del peccato, perciò è destinato a morire. La persona, siccome emerge dalle relazioni, la persona è chi? È un essere libero dalle relazioni. questa è la persona. Chi tesse le relazioni? Per esempio, se io dico Dio è eterno, non ho detto niente. Se io dico Padre, dico Dio genera, generare è un verbo della persona, esprime due relazioni, chi genera e chi è generato. Sono due persone. Vedete, una relazione definisce la persona. L'individuo non può creare la relazione. E perciò è molto interessante il capitolo dove lui sviluppa che quando si arriva a questa vita personale, ecco che si comincia a avviare il processo di creatività, perché creatività è comunionale, non è di un individuo che inventa qualcosa. Anzi, molto curioso, mi è piaciuto tantissimo un'espressione quando lui paragona una creatività legata all'individuo che cerca di affermare se stesso in una forma unica e cerca una forma assolutamente originale e poi non lo capisce nessuno, perché se io ho creato un quadro che è totalmente originale, è come se io creassi una lingua mia, un codice mio, una grammatica mia, e tu capisci? No. Allora l'immagine che lui usa è molto bella, perché dice alcune opere d'arte sono impronta digitale. L'individuo esprime se stesso, basta. Ma questo non tocca nessuno. Tanto è vero che ci sono certi episodi tristissimi. Tantissimi miei amici artisti aprono una mostra e alla mostra viene la fidanzata, un amico e un'altra zia, 3 persone. Perché? Non interessa a nessuno. Perché non leggo, non è leggibile, non è comunicazione. E come dice lui, l'arte quando non è più comunicazione è ancora arte. Questo mi sembra un altro passaggio veramente bello, quando lui fa vedere una specie di tragedia di questa creatività, di quale lui si domanda se è possibile o no considerare come arte. Su questo ero tentato di dire anche un pensiero proprio personale mio, un'esperienza mia. Io sono nato come un artista moderno, rivoluzionario e così via, assolutamente con idea che artista esprime se stesso, ma un certo giorno ho cominciato a capire che l'arte intesa così è un drago, è un rischio che può distruggere la persona umana. E pian piano sono passato proprio ad un'altra sponda, non l'arte come espressione di me, ma l'arte come mio servizio sia al vero, al bello, sia agli altri, cioè l'arte come servizio, non l'arte come la mia cosa che faccio. E questo proprio sono convintissimo che tu hai ragione, cioè l'arte intesa come servizio è l'unica via che recupererà l'arte per far uscire l'artista da questo abisso isolato totale. Poi fa delle analisi su alcune opere d'arte tipiche della modernità dell'inizio del XX secolo, en passant qua e là anche menziona delle performance, installazioni, cose anche contemporaneissime proprio di questi anni, ma mi sembra interessante quando lui analizza queste opere come Marcel Duchamp eccetera, e mi sembra anche lì un approccio molto originale. Alla fine non sono proprio del tutto convinto, però devo ammettere che è molto originale il pensiero, quando lui fa vedere che malgrado tutto, malgrado questa tragedia dell'individualismo, dell'individualità, dell'isolamento, della disperazione dell'individuo, di questo nulla che ormai non c'è più niente nell'uomo, io penso che l'intuizione è forte, ma non so se Gialto è già arrivato a elaborare tutte le possibilità, ma l'intuizione mi sembra molto interessante, che forse proprio questo vuoto che l'arte contemporanea o moderna mette in evidenza potrebbe diventare quel spazio che si può trasfigurare in uno spazio di quella libertà, di quell'amore libero di cui si può creare. Che proprio questa tragedia può tramutarsi in una specie di risurrezione. Questa è una intuizione, a mio parere, interessante. Io, nella mia esperienza, sia dell'artista sia del conoscitore dell'arte moderna, per tanti anni ho insegnato da Gregoriano proprio l'arte moderna, io dico che l'arte moderna è come la confessione. La galleria moderna è un confessionale. L'artista ha rovesciato il cuore, ha messo tutto fuori. Ma chi manca? Il confessore, perché non si interessa nessuno per quest'arte. Ma gli artisti vorrebbero esprimere qualcosa, e io penso che questi autori che lui analizza sono proprio quelli che hanno percepito la tragedia verso quale andiamo nell'arte. Duchamp, torno su di lui proprio, come tu stesso dici, lui, chiaro, lui prende un oggetto qualsiasi, lo istituzionalizza, perché mettendolo in galleria diventa l'arte. Però dietro questo si nasconde ancora questo mistero di personalizzazione degli oggetti. Questa è una tesi molto interessante. Però non so se per poter chiamare questo veramente creatività non bisognerebbe passare ancora una fase della purificazione. Perché comunque il passaggio dell'individuo alla persona è un passaggio attraverso la morte e la risurrezione. Non è semplicemente un slittamento, no? Non si slitta direttamente, è un passaggio sofferto. E io penso che il recupero della creatività sarà anche attraverso la purificazione dell'uomo di questa ambizione di fare qualcosa, perché io penso che questo vuoto, sulla tua intuizione io lavorerei avanti e direi che questo vuoto può diventare accoglienza di qualcosa, e questo sarebbe interessante per l'arte, perché io penso che l'artista moderno è arrivato a tal punto di solitudine. Mi ricordo una Biennale di Venezia, un padiglione francese, dove era la luce orientata sulla finestra reale dell'Arsenale di Venezia. Metà luce andava sotto dove sarebbe l'oggetto dell'esposizione, ma non c'era. Metà cerchio del faro illuminava la finestra, che però era fisicamente aperta. Questo per me è molto interessante. Cioè l'artista ha detto tutto, ma adesso ci vuole l'altro, l'accoglienza, questo uscire da sé, ecstasis, di cui anche tu parli, no? E io penso che questo libro è importantissimo perché fa vedere un pensatore, tra l'altro ortodosso, con presupposti teologici molto diversi dai latini, che affronta la creatività molto diverso come la affrontano i latini, e che alla fine non cancella l'arte moderna, non cancella l'arte contemporanea, ma cerca di trovare un aggancio per venire incontro affinché quello che oggi è tragedia diventa una speranza e quello che è vuoto diventa un'accoglienza da quale può nascere una creatività. Grazie. Hai capito?
Grazie tanto. He's teaching even here. Are you taking notes for your second volume, your next volume? Okay, thank you very much, Father Rupnik. It is my pleasure to introduce you now to Louis Ruprecht, Dr. Ruprecht, who is the William M. Suttles Chair of Religious Studies and the Director of the Center for Hellenic Studies at Georgia State University. He's also a research fellow in the Vatican Library and the Vatican Secret Archives, and a staff writer for the new e-magazine Sacred Matters, as well as a blogger for the Huffington Post. Dr. Ruprecht is a theologian whose research interests lie in ancient Mediterranean studies, comparative religious ethics, history of Christianity and on the New Testament in particular, and he is known for exploring the relationship between religion and culture and arts, the arts. He did his undergraduate work at Duke University, where he earned a degree in religion, followed up by an MA in theology, before going on to his PhD in religion at Emory University. Dr. Ruprecht has taught at his alma mater, Emory, as well as at Princeton, Barnard, Duke, Mercer, Claremont, and now at Georgia State. He and Davor met one another when they were both attending a conference on religion and realism in November here in Rome. And Dr. Ruprecht is here in Rome. He may be working with us, hopefully, in the future with his students at Georgia State. And we are fortunate that he will also be speaking to AUR, if I understand correctly, on March 11th and March 24th. So we will have 2 other occasions to hear him. Thank you very much for being here.
It's great to be here. I really felt an incredible sense of hospitality when I was here for the conference, and especially from Davor, so it's great to be back. As you will see in just a moment, I'm not really a theologian or an artist, so my approach to this book is a bit different, but equally personal and heartfelt, because the book is. On the one hand, this is a book which participates in what is, to my mind, one of the most interesting subfields in the business, which is religion and the arts. On the other hand, Davor does not use those terms, at least not directly. Instead, he's explicit about his interest in Christian theology, not religion in general. This book, therefore, develops a fascinating and sustained conversation among and between certain Orthodox theologians and a post-Kantian philosophical tradition of reflection on modern art and the modern artwork. In my remarks today, I want to take up Davor's invitation to engage in that conversation, while admitting right off the bat how difficult it is to do something like that well. I think this book does it very well, and in a remarkably short space of pages and time. The book invites us to see a deeper connection between human and divine acts of creation, which is a lot easier said than done, and I think the book really develops that idea. If God is fundamentally relational, 1, radically free, 2, and capable of creating out of nothing, 3, then so too is the human person. That's kind of the shocker, right? This idea hinges, I think, on a fairly optimistic view of human capacities. So for Davor, the original sin, and I think that "the" is important, is an event rather than an essence. An event that has made the achievement of true personhood more difficult but not impossible. He's more interested in creative theosis than in utter corruption, and that is one of the gifts, I think, of the Orthodox understanding of creativity as an event as well. Still, the connection of divine and human creativity is pretty complicated. Davor notes that many early Christian fathers all refer to God as teknites, a maker or fashioner, very much along the lines of the artists whom Plato and others claimed were involved in the crafts, or techne. But Davor wishes to distance himself from the sort of traditional understanding of techne. His artist is no mere technician. He's inviting us to look more closely at human artistic practices as a way into a new understanding of divine creativity and generativity. He invites us to see modern art as enacting a constructive position. Since the religious tradition Davor represents is both literary and historical, as all 3 of the scriptural monotheisms are, I've decided to approach the book philologically and historically. So I'd like to reorganize what he offers with slightly different terms, to pose a few questions that his work has generated for me, to quibble over the meaning of a couple of words, and to add a few bibliographical suggestions for future work, which I very much look forward to reading. I hope it's clear that all of this is offered in the spirit of creative friendship that the work calls for, too. For me, one of the central mysteries of early Christian formation involves the way in which Judaism and Hellenism were themselves gradually redefined. Whereas Paul could speak of both Jews and Greeks mysteriously joined in a common body of worship, his kind of cultural both-and reasoning did not last for very long. Anti-Judaizers complained that many of their contemporary Jesus followers failed to understand that the Messiah had introduced a new thing, a new covenant, so that to continue to participate in the old economy of salvation under the law was to fail to understand that in fact a new thing had already been created, had come into being. So the synagogue was now a suspect, if not a demonic place, and Judaism was a heresy. Similarly, anti-Hellenizers complained that many of their contemporary Jesus followers, especially the Greek converts, failed to understand that the Lord had introduced a new thing, requiring them to reimagine their Greekness. A great many things for which Hellenism had long stood were now condemned, or at least called into serious question. Polytheism and idolatry were regularly held up for condemnation, and a veritable new genre entitled To the Greeks or Against the Greeks was one in which most of the early fathers participated. So let me put the issue as I see it in the sort of starkest terms to generate discussion. In the first century, Paul could describe the Jesus movement as a mysterious synthesis of Judaism and Hellenism. 600 years later, St. John of Damascus, in an incredible encyclopedia of Christian heresy, The Fountain of Knowledge, described Judaism and Hellenism as the, quote, mothers and archetypes of all heresy. Clearly, converts to this new movement could not continue to participate in their old identities in quite the same way. A creative new thing had come into being, but it was not created out of nothing. Viewed one way, conversion to Christianity would have changed everything in the Roman Empire, but viewed another way, it changed very little. Roman Christians continued to eat, to dress, to buy, to donate money, to marry, and to die, much as they had always done. As Peter Brown has shown us, it took a very long time for a distinctively Christian culture to emerge, at least in the West. Once it did emerge, it was to receive further theological reflection, modification, and justification. So for me, this book places this question front and center. Did conversion to Christianity force the convert to alter his or her view of art? Did they even have a conception of art? That is, of visual images which existed independent of their liturgical use. And I want to organize my sort of brief reflections on that central question around four terms: Judaism, Hellenism, Christianity, and modernity. So Judaism. One of the most striking things about ancient Judaism is its apparent aniconic impulse, at least where the divine is concerned. The divine may not be represented in visual form according to the second commandment. As Calvin Bland has shown in a wonderful book called The Artless Jew, this did not mean that Jews didn't have decorative art. That idea, Bland suggests, came from Kant's and Hegel's dismissive comments about Judaism in their aesthetic works. Rather, it merely laid out the command, which was often violated in practice, that Jews not represent God in visual ways. As Davor knows well, this presented some serious problem for Christians once they concluded that Christ was God incarnate. Now, an icon depicting Christ was in fact a visual representation of the divine. How those sorts of things did not violate the second commandment was a question with sufficient force that it generated a whole new theology of the icon, summarized by John of Damascus and Theodore of Studion. And I'll come back to that in a second. If that distinction holds, then it would seem that Jews did indeed have a conception of art, but as decorative art rather than religious art. How Christians developed the concept of religious art would be worthy of further exploration. I've been drawn recently to the work of a French neoclassicist, Quatremère de Quincy, who suggests that there are actually parallels between Greco-Roman and Christian religion. And their similarity boils down to the fact that both produced anthropomorphic conceptions of the divine, and that's why both of them had a lot of art. A second issue concerns the Christian doctrine of creation out of nothing. Davor insists that this idea of God creating out of nothing is crucial to understand later theology, and I know that that's right, but the more I reflected on this issue, the less clear it was to me why that's so theologically central. What I mean is this: if you read the account of the creation in the first chapter of Genesis, then it doesn't seem as if God creates out of nothing. In the beginning there was stuff, but it was chaotic and lacked form. God imposes form on matter in Genesis chapter 1. If that's the case, then the creation out of nothing doctrine appears to be another important concept that Christians imported in order to change the Judaism they inherited. And it would be good to hear more reflection about why that's so important to you and to the book. So Hellenism, turning to Greek conceptions of human and divine techne, a similar ambiguity emerges, I think. In two very important notes near the beginning of the book, Davor makes several important conceptual distinctions. The first returns to that important word techne. Davor reminds us that in Greek this term implies both the skill to produce something and also the background knowledge to produce it well. That's right, I think, but I want to highlight another more ambivalent and instructive dimension of Greek thinking about creation and techne. Greek mythology is very much preoccupied with what happens when foreign things are creatively mixed together. What tends to come from such mixing are both marvels and monsters, and the human technician can't control the end result. The figure of Daedalus is actually really important mythologically here. He was credited with creating statues so lifelike that they moved and spoke, a remarkable act of godlike creation. But after he murdered someone in Athens and fled to Crete, the name of that island actually means mixing, Daedalus also fashioned a bull-shaped shell that enabled his queen to copulate with a bull, and the monstrous Minotaur was born, requiring yet another invention, the labyrinth, in which to house the monster. Later still, Daedalus's creation of wings and human flight resulted not in his escape from the island, but in the death of his son. In other words, Greek mythology was preoccupied with the unintended consequences of human creativity, its monstrous as well as its marvelous outcomes. And I suspect that this Greek idea is what inclined many of the early Christian fathers to utilize the most unfair throwaway line in their polemics against the Greeks. The claim was that Greek pagans were too stupid to realize that statues made with their own hands were not gods and not really worthy of worship. The problem is you can't really find a Greek stupid enough to say that like that. So the reason that Christians make the claim must lie somewhere else. And I think it's in that pesky doctrine of ex nihilo creation again. The early Christian fathers are consistent in noting that they distinguish between matter and the divine. In other words, the God of their creation is an immaterial being who brings matter into being. Human beings, by contrast, can't create ex nihilo that way. They can simply shape matter into various iconic forms. Statues are made of matter, so there's nothing divine about them. So Christianity. I take it that that distinction is important for Davor's project because it highlights the difference between Greek and Christian notions of divine creativity. I should say that I worry about overstating the difference between the Greek and Christian worldviews, especially where tragedy is concerned. Christianity is, in an important sense, a Greek religion, and I've argued elsewhere that the Synoptic Gospels are clearly modeled on classical Greek tragedy. Davor notes that the traditional Christian theology makes a radical distinction between the human and the divine, precisely over this question of creation. There seems to be a radical difference between the divine creator and creatures. The basis for this idea is once again the description of divine creativity in the first 3 books of Genesis. Adam and Eve, so the argument goes, were capable of giving names to creatures, but not of creating them. In fact, Genesis tells a slightly more complicated story. It's Adam who gives creatures their names, thereby, in Davor's terms, recreating the creation. I like that. Eve does not receive her name from Adam until after the fall. Originally, she was just called woman. When Adam gives her her name, Hava, meaning life, then he is subtly marking her new role and her new creative power. Since death has entered the world, Eve will now be a bearer of new life. That, I think, is the marker of a very distinctive human power of creation, and might help to make the point that Devore wishes to make about human participation in divine creation and the later application of the term creativity to human beings. Now, a baby's not a work of art exactly, I mean, it kind of is, but an icon surely is. And an icon, contrary to the traditional understanding, is not a figurative and mimetic representation. As Devore's book lays out very clearly, the orthodox reflection on the icon makes clear that they're not intended to be mimetic likenesses, but rather windows onto heaven. I found Hans Belting's book, Likeness and Presence, very helpful in this regard. Belting suggests that before the modern period, which he refers to as the era of art, images crafted by human artists were not conceived of as likenesses. Rather, they were created to contain a presence. Thus, an icon was not a work of art in that traditional sense. Art emerges in the modern world to serve a different and presumably non-religious purpose. Devore has a really interesting discussion of the fact that humans were represented as image and likeness in the beginning in Genesis, but I'll let you sort of riff on that if you want. So quickly on modernity, to finish. What I'm suggesting with Belting is that the concept of the artwork as a visual likeness, a mimetic representation of actual life, is one of the defining aspects of modern art and aesthetics, derived from Winckelmann's and Quatremer's celebration of the Greek imitation of nature and the neoclassical imitation of Greek art. Imitation, especially in its idealizing aspects, was the reigning aesthetic category until the later 19th century. The modernist art that Devore calls to our attention begins with the rejection of that aesthetic aspiration. Imitation, says Kandinsky, is best left to children and monkeys. Greek art is simply a thing of the past, and the era of Winckelmann was over. That's important to the story Devore is telling because the freedom from the obligation to imitate reality is what unleashed the modernist artist to paint abstractly, and so to render forms taken entirely from the artist's inner world of the imagination. That celebration of imaginative creativity lay at the heart of the modernist project, and I take it that Devore sees in this a human dimension of creation out of nothing. The artworks which he discusses, the ready-mades, the art of void, absence art, and even posthumous art, all turn our awareness to, he says, a Zen-like, pregnant emptiness at the heart of reality. I thought that was an incredible discussion as well. But the modern artist was free in other ways, too. Winckelmann insisted that democracy was the necessary social foundation for the Greek artist. Hegel and Quatremer concurred with that. The project of modern art insisted that the modern artist needed to be radically individual, there's the problem, radically creative, and radically free. In being freed from traditional religion, Winckelmann suggested the modern artist would be freed for Greek religion, once again. The neo-pagan impulse in the labor of modern art is worthy of close attention and may complicate the story that Devore wishes to tell here. One way to understand this celebration of the free artist is to see it as the secularization of art in the modern period in the name of the radically individual artistic genius. When Michelangelo informs the Pope that he's not painting for anybody but himself and later fled his commission, a new artistic era had begun. But Devore wants to tell a very different story, I think, and in this I'm in complete sympathy with him. In this account, the story of the modern artist is not a secular story, nor the story of modern art's escape from religion. Quatremer, like Andy Warhol, remained a practicing Roman Catholic. Keeping this in view, the story of modern art is the story of spiritual speculation and aesthetic wonder taking new routes and exploring new forms. It's the story of 20th century art's attempt to overcome narcissistic individualism, to think transcendence, and to recover both life and world, terms that you explore in the last chapter. As Maya Deren put it, the self must exit so that the spirit may enter. The goal is a fuller emptiness and a genuinely creative nothing. Modernism in this sense is one of the crucial religious forms for modern times, and I thank Devore for reminding us of this with his customary insight and gracefulness of expression. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of the themes that have been brought up and perhaps debate them a little bit later on, perhaps over a glass of Prosecco. I think I'm hearing some clinking glasses back there. Before I open it up to questions, before we adjourn to the clinking glasses, I'd like to introduce the author, Davor Jalto. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to my colleague. I've known Davor, as I said, since 2013 when he joined us at AUR as the director of both the art history and the religious studies programs. Now, before I hand it over to him, I would like to tell you a little bit about him. This extraordinary artist, art historian, theologian, and philosopher whom AUR is very fortunate to have on its faculty. Born in Travnik, Bosnia and Herzegovina, he started out studying graphic arts in high school, and then did his undergraduate work at the University of Belgrade in art history. He received his PhD from the Albert Ludwigs University of Freiburg in 2006, and not only completed his PhD work in what was reported to be a record time, but for a period was the youngest doctor of philosophy in the humanities in Germany and in the Southeast European region. He went on to do postdoctoral research at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Munster in Germany. Among the many awards and fellowships that he has received, I will mention that he was a Fulbright Scholar at Fordham University in New York. He received a U.S. Department of State Fellowship for Faculty Exchange and an international travel grant from CAA Getty Foundation for Teachers of Art History. He has taught at numerous universities in his native Serbia, including the University of Belgrade, University of Eastern Sarajevo, the Academy of Fine Arts at Belgrade, and the University of Nice, as well as in the United States, both at Fordham as a Fulbrighter and as a visiting professor at Indiana University. Including this one, he has authored 7 books, the first of which he wrote when he was 18 years old. Davor's articles and essays have been published in dozens of respected journals, and as an artist, his work, principally in the field of icon painting, has been shown in exhibitions across Europe. But above all, Davor is a thinker who critically, systematically, and creatively investigates various artistic, philosophical, and theological concepts, and then that inform his insightful analysis of contemporary society and culture. I want to thank Davor for asking me to be MC this evening, because it gave me the chance to do a little bit of research about him and to discover just how impressive a colleague I have. Not only is he a hardworking, congenial, dedicated academic with whom it is a joy to work, but I have discovered that he is widely considered to be one of the most important Orthodox Christian thinkers in the world today. I give you Professor Davor Jalto.
Well, I should say something after these inspiring talks and a wonderful introduction, so I'll just begin by saying thank you, Kathleen, for a wonderful job you did this evening, for this inspiring introduction, and for just all the work you've done in preparation for this evening. Thank you also, Father Marco, for being with us today. Father Marco, you may not know that, but he is busier than the Pope himself. So to have his an hour or two to spend with us is really a fortune and a great privilege. I also want to thank Lou for an inspiring reflection about those concepts that I partly addressed in my book, but I would say both of your analysis open much deeper questions than I even tried to address in my book. And thank you also, Richard, for being here and also for your very kind introduction. So I really don't want to say anything special. I think it's a pretty bad fashion when people write something and then continue on talking about it. So if you are interested what's there. You can just read the book. I'd just like to say why I was interested in these concepts and why I think the concept of creativity and concepts of freedom are so important, and where my own inspiration comes from to think about these concepts and to write about them. First inspiration, as you could hear from both presentations from Father Marco and Lou, is coming from just the situation that we find nowadays in Orthodox theology and also Christian theology in general. Christian theology for a very long time has not really been interested in the question of human creativity. Mostly when human creativity has been addressed, it was in connection to art or the question of beauty. So it was more theological aesthetics than analysis of human creativity per se, and especially not the place and role of human creativity for theological anthropology or soteriology. So my inspiration at the beginning was to try to look at human creativity based on what we find in Berdyaev and what we find in Zizoulas and other similar religious philosophers or theologians who actually try to point to this lack of serious analysis and reflection about human creativity. Because, as you could hear, and what Berdyaev also says in his work, Christian theology for a very long time has been preoccupied with the question of sin and redemption, and somehow human creative capacities have not been perceived as very essential, very fundamental for who we are as human beings. So I started from there, and somehow it seemed to me that just if there is some meaning to this analogy between God and human being, and if there is some meaning to the image of God, what human beings are supposed to be, then creativity has to be part of this imago Dei, of the image of God in the human being, together with freedom and together with human capacity to be personal, being not just individual. Another inspiration comes just from something that I think is becoming less and less important in our culture, modern culture, contemporary culture, and that is really the concept of human freedom. And not only the concept, but human freedom in reality, and the concept of creativity. After post-structuralist critique of creativity, we actually somehow started to think of creativity and freedom as typically modernist constructs that were invented at the same time when the concept of individuality was invented, which means at the beginning of the modern period, 18th century on. And that as such, those concepts really are not something anthropologically very significant, and especially not very significant for the contemporary culture. And I think that that observation had an everlasting impact since the 70s, actually late 60s and 70s up to now. And we all hear about freedom, we all hear about creativity and how these concepts are wonderful and great and should be practiced. But actually in practice, I think we get less and less freedom and less possibilities to be creative. And when I say that, I don't think only about theology, not only about arts, not only about culture, but actually about politics as well, about the way we practice who we are and what we do in our societies. And I think that is the reason why creativity and freedom should be affirmed, and this was one way to draw attention to those important questions. Of course, there are many more to explore, as both speakers commented and tried to actually open those questions that are still to be addressed and explored in detail. So thank you all also for coming, for taking time to be with us today. I hope it was bearable, if not interesting. And now I think we have some refreshments. So thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank our
refreshments, and I would say rather than perhaps doing a question and answer discussion in this venue, maybe we adjourn to that, raise a glass to Davor and continue the discussion.